So I'm talking about actual informal carers here, carers who look after people with M&D who are family members, because it's something that's really close to my heart. So back in 1972, so a long time ago, and I hope many of you don't remember that year, but back in 1972, I was 13. I was an only child in a family whose father travelled the world in the role that the job he did. But, yeah, in that year, my mum was diagnosed with a brain tumour. She died in 1980, so my formative years were spent as a young carer. And I was doing all the, personal hygiene stuff for a mother. And when I've reflected back all these years later, I thought, the sort of stuff that I was doing as a young carer, I'd have probably been taken into care myself now. Such was the state of services then. But it's taken 35 years for someone in the Alliance yesterday to say to me, and I want to pay tribute to this person, so Dr. Terry Heinemann-Patterson, who said to me, you're saying it was so rough for you as a carer? Do you think your mum liked it as well? And actually, no, probably not. So let's have a look at the other perspective as well, because it's really significant. So that's just by way of an introduction to say, carer-led approach is pretty close sort of to my heart, and it's why I take a lead on it in our M&D association. So very recently, we've undertaken a carer survey. We clearly do lots for people with M&D, but we also have a commitment in our strategy as an association, and it says at the moment we will do more for carers. So we've been having a look at what does that mean? What does that mean for us as an association delivering services? So we've had three historical things here. We did a survey of carers back in 2011. That gave us a bit of information, and we were able to sort of shape some services on. But then there's a national UK charity called Carers UK who did a wide survey in 2013 about the state of caring across the United Kingdom. We decided it was right to do our own survey again, so we've repeated our survey in 2015, but what we've been able to do is ask some very similar questions to the Carers UK survey, so we could get some comparisons. So is there any difference between a general carer out there with other conditions and people caring for people with M&D ALS? We were also able to compare it with our survey back in 2011. That's good. So our methodology. So our survey design, we were very fortunate in having one of our ex-heads of communications who set up her own company. Now, I want to pay tribute to Sarah Fitzgerald, who worked with us very closely in designing this survey. We went out to focus groups with carers to actually test this out before we actually used it, so it had some validity. And as I say, we were also able to compare it with National Carers UK results. We sent out 928 questionnaires and we had 448 returned, which we thought was pretty significant, and it gives us some really good information. What we didn't do, though, was include past carers. We didn't exclude past carers. And I think sort of looking back and knowing the people who responded, and I'll tell you why sort of later on in this presentation, we may well in future want to look at separating the two out, because there were some quite significant differences. So I've got a word, I'm told this is a word cloud, but yeah, never heard the term before. But and I'm equally told we had some free text responses, which was asking carers what did they feel. And apparently when you put these words down, the bigger the word is on the screen means it's had more responses, and the smaller means you've had fewer responses. And I was staggered to look at this, because you look at the size of some of those words and the emotion here, sort of exhausting, helpless, trapped. So many negative words, really hard sometimes to find some positive ones. They are there, like committed and rewarding, but in a sense, these are really sort of negative words of what does a carer feel. And it's the sentiment of many people, this, who are carers, because what really came through in our survey was this: it's not just a loss for people with MND and ALS, it's an actual loss for the carer as well, because if they're a wife, a husband, a lover, a partner, that relationship is in transition, and suddenly they become a nurse. And they're a nurse, and that nature of that relationship changes totally. So, what did our survey tell us? Before I go into this, I just want to acknowledge we had a presentation at the Alliance meeting yesterday from Jennifer Laregina, who works for the ALS Association of Greater Philadelphia chapter. And it was interesting. I was looking at her notes last night, and some of her findings and statistics that she gave us are very, very similar to the ones that we found here in our UK survey. So a typical carer is female, is in her 60s, retired, and with no children living at home. But to put that in context, out of our respondents, 78% were female, 22% were male, 61% were aged over 60, and with 27% of those over the age of 71, and 87% said they were caring for a partner. So what did we find? Over 50% of our carers said they were spending more than 100 hours per week caring for someone with MND ALS. The Carers UK survey in 2013 that I talked about, the average was 70 hours. So we're already a third more for carers of people with MND than is normal in the UK. 19%, so nearly a fifth, were not in work because of their caring role. So not only are they having transitions in their relationships, they're probably getting further into poverty as well, having to give up paid employment. So in the UK, there's a right to state benefits that we call the carers allowance. 66% though of our carers were not aware of it and were not claiming. Some of them, and we still have a generation in the UK of people who are, if we've said they're over 60, who are pretty proud and don't like to be seen to be claiming benefits anyway from the state, but here we have 2/3 not claiming anything. We had a third of our carers unaware of their right to an assessment from the state, because not only can the person with MND ALS obviously be assessed and have their needs identified, but there is now a right embedded in legislation in the UK for a carer to have assessment, but a third of them not accessing that. A positive, 66%, so 2/3, felt well supported with information from the MND Association. What it says to me is, okay, a third don't, so I've got a bit of a challenge there in closing the gap on this one. Some of the key concerns that our carers had, and the very top one was, what will happen if I fall ill? We even had 2 out of those 448 that said, what happens if I die in the night to the person that I'm caring for? There were comments, I get no break from my caring role. Caring for people with MND is far more time consuming. I just don't have the time to do the things I want to do. And it's not surprising, is it, if they're caring for over 100 hours a week? I never expected to be a nurse instead of a wife, a husband, a lover, a partner. So what next? What are some of the things that we're doing as an association, are we going to start doing? We've put together sort of a carers action plan, which we're sort of heading, which I'm heading up. But one of the clear things we want to do is we need to be in touch with more carers. We don't really, we sent out, as you saw there, 928 questionnaires. We know 3,500 people with ALS MND in our association. We're clearly not in touch with enough carers. And that's something we really need to do and we really want to identify. We have a carer's guide from our care information that we produced 2-3 years ago, an award-winning carer's guide. We're going to bring that right up to date, and we're currently reviewing that, and this time we're involving carers in that, about the content and what it should look like, information that's really useful for them. We've introduced a carer's grant. So my colleague Karen Pearce, who you'll hear from later, oversees our financial support programme, and normally it's been for people with MND, ALS and their children, but actually we recognise that carers do need a break, and often because of poverty in the family, not working, that's impossible. So, people can apply to us for that carers grant, which is a maximum of £500 in any 1 year. Doesn't affect the amount of money the person with MND may apply for, but it's just something to give a little relief to that person in their caring role. We're beginning to promote the Carers Assessment Tool. This is something that some of you will know Mary O'Brien from Edge Hill University in the UK. And the Carers Assessment Tool is really a RAG system, so red, amber, green. The sort of volunteers or people working with families can just go through 7, 8, 9 questions, and actually the answers there actually can flag up there's some real carer burden issues going on here, and bring in other services for support. So we're really beginning to promote that Carers Assessment Tool. We need to campaign. I said only a third of people access a carers assessment. We really need to campaign in the UK that people have got a right for this assessment. And where that happens elsewhere in the world, I would really encourage you to do that as well, because carers are very, very reluctant, we found, to ask for services, to ask for intervention for themselves. We've introduced a welfare benefits project in England, again, looking at how we can maximise benefits to families that are affected, and the early indications of that's proving pretty successful. And we've made a commitment to develop our education resource for carers. And when Jen was talking about her programme yesterday, she has virtual groups that meet sort of over the internet, and we're using WebEx, so we've got some real good challenges ahead about what we can do. So some of our recommendations to the field on carers. What we really need to do is involve carers in our service design of both our literature and our hands-on provision. And that sounds absolutely obvious, but actually often as professionals we don't even think of that, and we get on and do stuff and think it's best for people without actually involving them. So involvement of people from the beginning and the onset is key. Consider how you can support carers locally. We have a network of branches and groups. So in America, I know you have chapters. One of our early learning things, and I said I would come back to this sort of later, is about bringing carers together. And one of our very first support groups for carers was so well attended, the second one wasn't. And one of the things we learnt from that is we used the term carers generically, and we had both current carers going to that group and we had past carers. And the current carers in that group were absolutely horrified at some of the stories they heard from past carers, and it made them not want to come again. So, that was a bit of learning for us. We don't even look at groups of people, of carers generically as well with one label. We've got to really think about what should the offering be. Using things like the Carers Assessment Tool, we really want to develop other tools that help identify carer burden so we can begin to signpost people to appropriate services. And here we've got the bullet, the differing needs of groups of carers. I alluded earlier on to young carers and children, and we can't deal with them in the same way we do with adult carers. And really ensure you know where to signpost for other sources of support. Jodie O'Donnell-Amos, who spoke at the Alliance meeting yesterday from ALS Hope Loves Company, noted that 85% of families affected by MND at some point have a child or a young person responsible for giving care, whether that's to a parent or a grandparent. So again, important we differentiate between groups of carers. So thank you for listening, and I'd just like to acknowledge the MND Association of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and Sarah Fitzgerald of Self Communications for her development of the questionnaire, the initial analysis, and that's allowed us to begin to develop and progress our programme for carers. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. It's now open for questions.
Hello, I'm Melissa Enfinger with the Alabama chapter of the ALS Association. I actually have two questions. One, where could we get copies of some of the assessments that you use, like to see an example of the caregiver's action plan. Do you have that available?
Okay, if you see me afterwards, I'll give you my email address and I can sort that out for you when I get back to the UK.
Thank you. And also with the carers grant, you said it's up to £500 annually. What kind of things does that cover? Is that for respite specifically for breaks, or is it for anything the caregiver wishes?
I think if you want to pass the microphone to your right, my colleague Karen can answer that for you.
Hi, yeah, absolutely. It's for respite care or a pamper day or anything that will be different and can take you away from that caring responsibility and annually. So.
Susan Walsh from the Greater Philadelphia chapter. Just to let you know that we have a evidence-based practice tool for caregiver assessment that we have developed. It was a research-driven tool. It's available on our website at the Hershey ALS Clinic for use. And we use that tool, which encompasses all those areas of care and are consistent with what you found with your survey. And we've been using it successfully in our clinic for approximately 6 years, and our team uses it at every visit to screen for depression and physical needs. So that might be a good resource for you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much,
that's
Steve.
Good.
No other questions? Okay. Thank you, Steve.